two separate standards. If they were not a medical marijuana patient and driving, 2 elements. They're driving, THC in their system. On the other hand, if they were a medical marijuana patient, they had to show 3 elements. They were driving, THC in their system, and they were under the influence. Well, we're going to make it easy now for everybody. The Recreational Marijuana Act makes it clear that one of the prohibitions under Section 4 is you have to be under the influence of that marijuana when driving. They too also have a section in the act that says any law that conflicts with my law, your law takes a back seat. So what we're training the officers now to do as we go forward, anyone who's driving with THC in their system, they need to show, and the prosecutor needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that they're operating under the influence of that THC in their system. They have to have THC in their system in order for the prosecutor to go forward, though. If it's the inactive metabolite, TCOH, they can't go forward because that's not a Schedule I drug under Michigan law. And that THC moves very rapidly through the blood. Yep. Okay, that's a good question. I held off on that because I wanted to talk about it. And
How can you tell if you have it?
well, when the blood's taken by the phlebotomist, it's sent to the Michigan State Police lab, and they can decipher whether it's THC or TCOH.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
So
THC
if
stays in your
not-
system.
THC doesn't stay in your system all that long. It's the TCOH, the inactive metabolite, or the inactive ingredient to THC that stays in your system quite a long time.
I
Not the THC.
assume that the blood test is a lot more expensive than a breathalyzer test.
It
Who
is.
pays for that?
Well, the defendant will pay for that if they're convicted, depending on whether that particular judge orders that as part of their probation or their fines and cost. It's the cost of prosecution.
I have a question regarding employers.
Go what?
Employers,
Oh, I'm sorry,
if
yes.
an employer has a rule, no drug policy,
Yeah.
now that this is whether it's after marijuana or not, if they say you should not be able to have it, now you've got a conflict of an
Well,
employer.
the act makes it very clear, though, that one thing that's the saving grace in the Recreational Marijuana Act, it says that employers can still discipline and fire.
Okay,
So that's in the Recreational Marijuana Act,
regardless,
of
and that
whether.
didn't affect any random drug tests at all?
Right, I mean, basically, even though this act was passed, it still gives the employer unfettered discretion to do what they want to do with respect to somebody testing positive for THC in their system.
And what about if you pull over a minor, children under 21? What is going to be done about that when you think they're high?
Right now, we're telling the police, or we're advising or suggesting to police officers to show that they're under the influence.
So you're going to have to do a blood test.
They would have to do what they would do, just like you're investigating a drunk driving case. They would have to investigate that case in order to show reasonable or probable cause that they are driving under the influence of marijuana. Once they have that probable cause, they can now ask him to submit to a breath test, a blood test. Because they suspect marijuana, they'll ask him to submit to a blood test. If that minor says no, then they can go to the judge and ask for a search warrant to have his blood taken.
Okay.
And they usually call the judge at 3 o'clock in the morning.
So the kids can't decline it, they have to get it done.
Regardless if they're a minor or not, by the fact that they're driving on their roadways, they're subject to the implied consent law. Okay?
For someone who's never used marijuana, explain to me as a police officer what the impairment of alcohol is versus the impairment of marijuana. Is it the same?
Actually, a lot of things that we're seeing now, I think Ken can speak on this topic too, is speed has been increased a little bit.
I'm sorry?
Speed of drivers, which is ironic.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Speed of drivers seems to be going up. We're seeing, I mean, this is not new to us. We've seen for years people using marijuana and driving. Some of the same, slurred speech and all that type of stuff you're going to see. Some of the same factors that we consider someone's been using alcohol. But there's some differences too.
I just add on to that a little bit too, as a former prosecutor and as a judge, what I've seen, and Ken may disagree with this or not, but people who are impaired by marijuana a lot of times don't show the signs as much as they do with alcohol.
Right.
So looking at a video by a jury at someone who's under the influence of marijuana, it's not as clear cut. And I actually just had a jury trial case that I thought was a slam dunk that the prosecutor lost, with 2 nanograms of marijuana, 90 nanograms of Xanax, and 0.05 of alcohol. And apparently this jury thought it was okay for the guy that I saw doing the field sobriety test to drive around in his car. So they're, I believe, much harder to prove than the alcohol cases
Yeah.
are.
And first of all, I will never disagree with the judge.
No, I am aware of the fact that at least 56% of people out on the road today are driving high, either alcohol or the marijuana.
Wow.
That's scary.
Or pills.
Well, yeah.
You have to remember that
56% or
tinctures,
more.
remember that tinctures is
Yes.
alcohol-based THC.
Yeah.
So you gotta remember, there's a lot of poly drug use out there. I mean, not only looking at marijuana, if you look at the individual who killed those 5 bicyclists in Kalamazoo, he was on a number of drugs, tramadol, the Xanax, the
He was messed up.
Vicodin. He had a number of drugs in the system, no alcohol. If you look at another video, and I'm not making light of this, Tiger Woods was on 5 different drugs at the time he was slumped over the wheel of his vehicle in Florida. I mean, he didn't even know where he was at. He was asked, "Where are you?" He thought he was in California when he was in Florida. I mean, so drugs affect people differently, certainly. I mean, I'm being like Captain Obvious, but, I mean, for example, 2 nanograms of THC in somebody's blood may affect that individual differently than somebody with 50 nanograms of THC in their blood. It's all about the psychoactive effect to the brain dealing with the marijuana. So they look for different signs and symptoms or general indicators with marijuana that necessarily may not be there with somebody who's drinking alcohol. And they get trained on it.
Before we leave too, if we could have the 56% of you guys that are high.
Wait till the rest of it.
Really all of us.
Did you say that Canton is not allowing
Yeah.
any dispensaries?
Go over that again. Is
Yes,
Canton
my
opting out?
understanding that the township trustees have voted to opt out at this point.
Didn't we have a couple and now they're gone?
No.
No.
I mean,
Okay.
there have been shops that we've ultimately investigated and they're not working anymore. So,
Okay.
So my question is, you mentioned the duck dogs. Right. You know, will they go to Jason's farm? Is that what happened?
Fortunately, we had 3 dogs, so just to provide some background, my opinion, after learning over the years, the law was set up with the premise that marijuana is illegal. I don't want,
Yes,
we don't
we
want
don't.
our dogs to be used as probable cause to search your vehicle when there's a good chance the marijuana in your car is legal. So one dog just recently passed away.
Yes.
Then we had a new dog that I sent to the feds. It's going to be used for them right now. They use the dog mostly after a search warrant, and we're going to retire the other dog. So we're going to train all our dogs on drugs, not marijuana, essentially.
So won't that stop us? What are you gonna do about it in the schools? Because it's really bad in the schools.
It's, to be honest with you, I think the lieutenant and I went to the academy together. I think since we started until now, you can smell marijuana.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Well, they're doing brownies and they sell them during class and stuff. They're doing all kinds of stuff in Westland, these kids, it's bad.
Yeah.
John Glenn is bad, that's what they call it.
Okay, again, being a person who's not used marijuana, how long does it stay in your system, and does that change depending on the percentage of THC in the product?
It's gonna, the THC is the active ingredient to marijuana. That's the Schedule I drug. Usually that stays in your system about, it depends on how much you took, when you last took it, the THC potency, the strain. But generally, these guys will draw blood maybe 2.5, 3 hours later. They may not see the THC in their system because it dissipates rapidly through the blood. It's not like alcohol. The more you drink, the more buzz you get, the number goes up higher. With the THC, it's the reverse effect. As you're feeling that psychoactive hit in your brain, it's moving very, very rapidly through your blood, and it changes into TCOOH, which is not a Schedule I drug, and therefore the prosecutor can't use that to go forward on an operating while intoxicated case if it comes back TCOOH, because our Michigan Supreme Court has said that TCOOH is not a Schedule I drug. Now, the TCOH may stay in your system for 30 days, 60 days, it depends. I mean, but that can't be used against that individual driver if that's all they have in their system. That makes sense. I'll give you an example of a case, just very, very quickly. Mr. Fiesel is driving down the road in Washtenaw County. He hits a pedestrian in the middle of the road. He kills that pedestrian. What happens, he takes off from the scene of the crime. Well, Mr. Fiesel's father convinces him to turn himself in, so he turns himself in approximately 3 hours later to the deputy at the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department. That deputy suspected at the time he killed that pedestrian, he was high, driving. So he does an investigation, he gets a search warrant, and he gets Mr. Fiesel's blood. Well, the blood results come back TCOOH. The prosecutor cannot go forward on that case because it's not THC. So in the next 2 to 3 hours, that THC dissipated rapidly through Mr. Fiesel's blood. So it moves very quickly, the THC. Okay?
And if it was a different percentage, would it stay in their blood
It
longer?
depends on the potency level and the strain and how, once again, how much you take, when you last took it, and how often you took it. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very, scientists are still doing a lot of research on that particular issue. Remember, scientists could not do research on this issue because the feds wouldn't let them do research because it's a Schedule I drug. Now they're starting to come around and doing some research on this issue, including the issue you raised.
Thank you.
So when I looked at Ken's resume, I didn't see the chemist on there, but yes, the glorious judge from 29th District Court.
Yes. I have a question for the treatment professional that we have here. We have had people in my mental health court that have a problem with marijuana. They're addicted to it, but we have trouble finding treatment facilities for them. Most of our people are on Medicaid, and Detroit Wayne Community Mental Health Authority doesn't want to pay for marijuana addiction. So what can people do to get treatment for a marijuana addiction?
You know, I mean, we do, so I'm in Washtenaw County, so we have a different public funding authority. And we do get people funded for, for treatment for cannabis use disorders. Like I said, only about 2% of our admissions, are primary cannabis use disorders. They would be very unlikely to, they would probably be very unlikely to fund somebody for residential treatment, but for outpatient, that's easy.
Well, yeah, what about residential though?
Yeah, for residential, it's so the state has gone to using the American Society of Addiction Medicine patient placement criteria, which uses, 6 domains, and, that relate to physical safety and emotional, psychological health and risk of relapse and ongoing use. So I think you'd have to be able to make an argument under those domains that this person is at risk, so, in order to get the funding.
I have a question for Ken. The marijuana that has the THC in it, that's what is being sold
Correct.
out in the medical marijuana dispensaries and
That is
stuff?
correct.
So what is the difference between just the, I guess it's called cannabis oils?
Right.
Those
The
aren't
CBD
illegal?
oil, that'll take forever to talk about.
Oh,
They
I just talked
extract it from the
talked
milk.
with somebody for about 45 minutes on the way here. That's very complicated in terms of the law. Certainly you can get the CBD oil from a medical marijuana dispensary because they can sell it because they have a license to do so. It's very complicated because the federal government just recently said that industrial hemp is legal. The problem is our state in their infinite wisdom passed 3 bills into law in January that basically said if you want to sell industrial hemp, you got to get a license to do so or market it through the Department of Agriculture. But in the meantime, we passed the Recreational Marijuana Act that allows you to basically possess hemp an amount 0.3% less THC. The problem is, where do you go for that? Well, I can't go to a recreational marijuana dispensary to get it because they can't sell it yet. I can't go, I mean, I have to go get a medical marijuana card if I want to get it from a medical marijuana facility. And it's really interesting because the law talks about industrial hemp. So you see these places like Meijer, Plum Market, Whole Foods selling this stuff. And I'm really suspect about it because it doesn't talk about marijuana plants or something. It talks about industrial hemp. Well, CBD oil comes from industrial hemp, and they're marketing this stuff. So they got to be very cautious about what they're doing. If I was advising them, I would tell them to pull it from the shelves, but I'm not advising them. They haven't paid me anything. So, but I mean, it's a very complex issue right now, the whole CBD oil issue. I think our state needs to clean that up, clean that issue up, and make it available for individuals to possess. Even if it has no THC in it, nonetheless, it comes from industrial hemp, and once again, you got to get a license to sell that. So it's really a fascinating issue right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, it's 8 o'clock, and it looks like we're exhausted. If I take one more question?
Actually, yeah, Dr. Vanji is the doctor in the house, so he might be able to answer some of those questions.
I'd like to give a little bit of another perspective in this instance. First of all, Ken, when are you going to do the full presentation?
I'm sorry?
When are you going to do the full presentation?
When
You skipped through a bunch of very relevant
I did because of time today.
Well, when are you going to go through the whole thing?
I can make this PowerPoint available to you, but certainly, I will be glad to do it whenever you would like to invite me back.
I think what we should do is do like a PowerPoint where we do the audio and make that available. So we
Sure.
can-
I actually have done that. You can get that off of one of the defense attorney's Facebook sites. Yeah, Michael Camorn actually has it on his site, and he actually says nice things, so.
In reality, this should be a football arena. I mean, that's how important it is. This information right now, it shouldn't be just a handful of people. This is something that's relevant.
And I learned so much from these individuals too. I learned so much from him and the judge and how he's handling the cases, and certainly the deputy chief. So I learned a lot. That's why I come to these, because I learned so much from everybody else too.
Yeah, I just want to go over to the medical perspective on this. First of all, pediatric is up to the age of 24. That's when the brain officially stops growing. Okay? And the fundamental problem is neuroplasticity, and it's the fact that children's brains are forming, right? And the marijuana that's being introduced to these children is not natural marijuana. Grown in a natural state, the THC is balanced with CBD and CBG. They counterbalance the debilitating effects of THC. Okay? And so, to answer that question about CBD and CBG, it's absolutely nutrient. It has no detriment to CBD and CBG. It's actually found to be neuroprotective and actually neuroregenerative. So it plays an important role with upcoming Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disorders. There's an important role to it. Or like you were saying, I didn't bring up the point, is that the law says any extract of cannabis. Well, that's what CBD is. But the point is that CBD and CBG are very nutritive and very healing to the nervous system. They're in there in a natural balance, just like the tobacco. If you go back to the American Indian tobacco, it's nothing like the tobacco we're smoking now. This tobacco we have now is tremendously out of balance with the amount of nicotine and making it very addictive. And they did that on purpose. Okay? So we got the same problem with the marijuana. The marijuana, that it's not natural. It's very unbalanced and just driving the THC. So we have to get child smoke this new cannabis that has this tremendously high amount of THC in it. It's very disruptive, to the neuroplasticity, the formation of the nervous system. And, I really think, one point I want to make that's very important is we need to identify the schools that are a problem, and then you need to have peers go in there. Peers that are going to relate to these children and are going to communicate with them. Okay? I really think that's the key way to get this under control. And there's a lot more discussion, but identifying the problem schools and getting those peers in there, getting those 19-year-olds in there that have learned their lesson the hard way, and they can communicate with these kids and get through to them, okay? Talking to prepubescent children, I think, is a waste of time. And it really shouldn't be brought up to them because they're not really, it's not in their world. I mean, it's moving in that direction. but it's the post-pubescent kids, you know, they're adults, you know, and they need to be treated as adults. And I'm really concerned because of the complexity of the law, that the amount of teenagers that are going to get a criminal record, and I think primarily because of the complexity of the law. It's just, I've got a doctorate, and me trying to understand this law, I mean, I could, but I'd have to put a lot of time and effort to really understand this law to make sure I wouldn't get in trouble if I was a teen. And, let's see what else we got here. Well, you know, one point is a lot of people start off with it being fun, right? But you also have to realize that when a lot of adults are using it, they're not using it for fun. They're using it as a tranquilizer. They're using it for a way to de-stress, to feel comfortable, you know? And mental health is a real problem. I mean, the DSM, I have no respect for at all. It's the manual we use to diagnose mental health, and it's a mess. It doesn't really, we live in a very complex world that's technologically advanced. Our level of education does not match the world we're living in. People need to understand the mental health process. They need to identify mental health and watch and be aware of its degenerative process over time. You know, going from general anxiety disorder, you know, to schizophrenia, there's a whole process that happens there. And the whole mental health world is deplorable. We know that. It's been talked about on the news, how the insurance companies don't like covering mental health. You know, they'll cover the physiological, but they won't cover the mental. And I think it's time that people are educated. I'm a very heavy promoter of education. And I really think that education needs to be a real focus on this issue. And I think that's.
I think maybe you, is that a question?
Caffeine is a substance, okay? Chocolate is a substance, sugar is a substance. You know, you need to call something that alters your brain metabolism. A lot of them are legal, you don't talk about them, but you can get addicted to cigarettes, you can get addicted to coffee, you can get addicted to chocolate.